The reactor leak alarm was the last sound David Holt expected to hear on a routine cargo run. Red lights painted the walls of the wandering star as toxic gas poured into Cargo Bay 7. Somewhere in that bay sat 3 months of profits and enough radioactive material to kill everyone on board. David was already running before Captain Renix finished his announcement. 3 years on this ship had taught him every weak point, every flaw, every place where the old vessel might betray them. He knew the only way to seal that breach was from inside the bay itself, through a maintenance shaft too small for anyone else on the crew. Human, Renix's voice crackled through his earpiece. The Druvani captain never used David's name. Status report. I can seal it manually, David said, pulling on his emergency suit. 20 minutes, maybe less. The contamination is spreading. I know. That's why I'm going now. He passed Yali in the corridor. The Finari first officer grabbed his arm, her fox-like face tight with worry. David, the readings are getting worse. If the seal doesn't hold, it'll hold. He gave her a small smile. I'm good at this, remember? Goss stood near the maintenance shaft entrance, his massive reptilian body blocking the path. The Brutari looked at David with those cold yellow eyes, then stepped aside without a word. He never had much to say. He just followed orders. The shaft was tight, dark, and already warm from the escaping radiation. David crawled through, his suit sensors screaming warnings he ignored. He'd survived worse. Humans always did. That was the one thing this galaxy never seemed to understand about his species. They bent, but they didn't break. The breach was ugly. A stress fracture in the hull had split open a coolant line, which had then eaten through the containment unit. David worked fast, his hands steady despite the fear coiling in his stomach. Seal the fracture first. Reroute the coolant. Contain the leak. Breach contained, he reported, wiping sweat from his face. Give me 5 minutes to secure the backup seals, and I'm coming out. Silence answered him. Captain? Yali? Does anyone copy? His suit's external sensors picked up a sound. A deep, mechanical groan. The sound of docking clamps releasing. No, David whispered that he scrambled to the small viewport in the cargo bay wall. Through the thick glass, he watched the stars begin to move. Not the stars. The ship. The wandering star was pulling away, and the cargo bay, his cargo bay, was no longer attached to it. His comm unit crackled one last time. Captain Renix's voice was cold, clinical, utterly without remorse. 1 human is acceptable loss. File the death report. Renix. Renix. David slammed his fists against the viewport. Through the glass, he could see the bridge windows. Renix stood there, his insectoid face unreadable. Beside him, Yali was shouting, her hands pressed against the glass. Goss simply watched, motionless as stone. Then the ship turned, engines flaring bright blue, and jumped to hyperspace. David stood in the silence of the abandoned cargo bay, watching the stars settle back into stillness. His breath came in ragged gasps. His suit was damaged. His oxygen was limited. And below him, growing larger every second, was Theta, 9 at the death moon that he knew the classification by heart. Every spacer did. Theta, 9 was listed as extinction-level hostile. The atmosphere was toxic. The temperature swings could kill in minutes. The native life forms were the stuff of nightmares. No rescue mission had ever returned from its surface. The cargo bay shuddered as it hit the upper atmosphere. Fire bloomed across the viewport. David strapped himself to a support beam and held on as his world became noise and heat and terror. He thought about his mother back on Earth, who had begged him not to take a job so far from home. He thought about his sister, who had laughed and said he'd be fine because humans were too stubborn to die. He thought about Yali's face pressed against the glass, her mouth forming words he couldn't hear. The impact came like the fist of an angry god. David didn't know how long he was unconscious. When he opened his eyes, the cargo bay was a crumpled ruin around him. His suit integrity read 40%. His oxygen supply showed 6 hours remaining. Blood ran down his face from a gash on his forehead. Through a crack in the hull, he could see the surface of Theta 9. Volcanic mountains spewed black smoke into a green-tinged sky. The ground was dark stone, cracked and unstable. Lightning flickered in clouds that looked like bruises, and something was moving between the mountains. Something massive. Something alive. David pulled himself from the wreckage on shaking legs. His ribs screamed in protest. His left arm hung at a bad angle. Every breath felt like swallowing glass, that he should be dead. He should give up. He should lie down and let Theta 9 finish what Rennick started. But David Holt was human, and humans don't know when to quit. He took one step toward a rock formation that might offer shelter. Then another. Then another. Above him, the massive shape moved closer, and the ground trembled with something that might have been footsteps. David kept walking. The first creature that tried to kill David looked like a spider made of stone and hatred. It burst from the ground 3 hours after the crash, all clicking mandibles and razor legs. David beat it to death with a metal pipe from the wreckage. His hands were bleeding and his broken ribs screamed with every swing, but he didn't stop until the thing stopped moving. That was when he understood the truth about Theta 9. This moon didn't want survivors. Every rock, every shadow, every breath of toxic air was designed to kill. And everything that lived here had evolved to be even deadlier than the environment. David found shelter in a narrow crevasse between two volcanic ridges. He had 4 hours of oxygen left, emergency rations for 2 days, and wounds that were slowly killing him. His suit's medical system pumped painkillers into his blood, but they were running low. Soon he would feel everything. Night fell fast on Theta 9. The temperature dropped so quickly that ice formed on David's visor within minutes. He huddled in his crevasse, shivering, watching his breath fog and freeze. Then the ground began to shake. Something was coming. Something big. David pressed himself against the rock wall as a shadow passed overhead. Through a gap in the stone, he saw it. A creature so massive it blocked out the stars. Its body was serpentine, covered in scales that glowed with inner heat. Wings like torn sails spread from its back. Eyes like dying suns swept across the landscape, searching. Avoid WYRM. David had heard stories about them. The apex predators of Theta 9. Ships that crashed here were found empty, with claw marks the size of doorways gouged into the hulls. The WYRM passed overhead, its attention fixed on something in the distance. David didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink until the shaking stopped and the shadow was gone. He survived the night. Barely. The next day, David began to learn. He watched how the ground cracked before eruptions and learned to read the warning signs. He noticed how certain plants glowed blue before releasing deadly spores and kept his distance. He studied the smaller predators, learning their patterns, their weaknesses. His oxygen ran out on day 2. David removed his helmet, expecting death. The air burned his lungs like breathing fire. He coughed, gagged, felt his eyes water and his skin itch. But he didn't die. Humans evolved on a planet that was constantly trying to kill them. Predators, diseases, natural disasters, extreme temperatures. Earth was a death world by galactic standards. David's ancestors had survived ice ages and plagues and wars that should have wiped them out. His body adapted. Slowly, painfully, but it adapted. On day 3, David found the structured IT rose from the volcanic rock like a black tooth, clearly artificial, clearly ancient. The walls were covered in symbols that seemed to shift when he looked at them directly. A door opened as he approached, though he hadn't touched anything. Inside, the air was clean. The temperature was stable. Lights flickered to life in the walls, revealing a long corridor that descended into the moon's crust. David followed it down. The structure was massive, a complex of chambers and passages that had survived for millennia. Whoever built this place had technology far beyond anything David had ever seen. The walls displayed images, beings that looked almost humanoid, changing themselves, evolving, becoming something new. At the heart of the complex, he found a pool. The liquid inside glowed with soft golden light. It moved on its own, rippling without wind, rising toward him as if aware of his presence. The symbols on the walls pulsed in rhythm with its movement. David's wounds were infected. His ribs hadn't healed properly. Internal bleeding was slowly filling his chest cavity. Without medical attention, he had maybe a day left. The pool waited. David thought about Renix's cold voice. Acceptable loss. He thought about floating in the void, watching the ship jump away without him. He thought about dying alone on a moon that no one would ever come to. He was going to die anyway. David knelt at the edge of the pool and drank. The liquid was warm and tasted like starlight and electricity. It flowed down his throat and into his blood, and suddenly David couldn't breathe, couldn't think. couldn't see anything except visions burning through his mind. He saw the beings who built this place. They had come here to hide, to change, to become something that could survive anything. They had engineered themselves at the cellular level, bonding with Theta 9's ecosystem, becoming part of the moon itself, and then others had come. Outsiders who feared what they had created. They had burned the builders from existence, but they couldn't destroy what they had left behind. The pool had been waiting for someone desperate enough, stubborn enough, human enough to drink from it. David's body seized. His bones cracked and reformed. His cells died and were reborn. Pain beyond anything he had ever known tore through him, and somewhere in the darkness of the structure, he screamed. 3 days later, his eyes opened. They glowed faintly in the dark. His wounds were gone. His body felt different, stronger. Wrong. Right. Outside, a void WYRM called out across the volcanic plains. David stood and walked out of the structure to meet it. Not as prey. As something else entirely. The first time David walked through a lava field without pain, he knew he wasn't human anymore. At least, not completely. His bare feet touched molten rock and felt only warmth. His lungs filled with toxic fumes and filtered them like clean air. His eyes saw heat signatures painted across the landscape like art. The pool had changed him at every level. His cells regenerated faster than any wound could kill him. His muscles had grown dense and efficient. His senses reached beyond normal limits, catching sounds and frequencies that should have been impossible. But the strangest change was the awareness. David could feel life around him. Every creature, every organism, every pulse of biological energy on Theta 9 registered in his mind like lights in darkness. At first, it was overwhelming. A constant flood of sensations that made him want to scream. But slowly, day by day, he learned to filter it, to control it. The void WRMS were the first to notice what he had become. A week after his transformation, David climbed to the highest peak on the continent. A WYRM found him there, descending from the clouds like a god of destruction. Its eyes burned as it studied him, its massive head close enough to swallow him whole. David didn't run. He stood his ground and looked into those ancient eyes. The WYRM saw something in him. Recognition, maybe, or kinship. It made a sound deep in its throat, something between a growl and a song, and then it turned and flew away. After that, the WRMS followed him. They never attacked. They watched from the clouds, circled above him when he hunted, called to each other when he moved from one territory to another. David began to understand their language. Not words, but vibrations, frequencies, patterns of movement. The beings who built the structure had done the same thing. They hadn't just survived Theta 9. They had joined it, become part of its ecosystem. The pool was designed to bond its drinker to the moon, to make them one with every living thing on its surface. David learned to hunt the predators that had once hunted him. The stone spiders, the acid worms, the shadow cats with their venomous claws. His body moved faster than thought. His new senses warned him of attacks before they came. He became the apex predator of a world full of apex predators. Months passed. David lost track of time in the endless cycle of volcanic days and freezing nights. He returned to the structure often, learning from its records, unlocking its secrets. The builders had been called the Aaron. They had spread across dozens of worlds, changing themselves to survive each environment. They had become something beyond species, beyond evolution. And they had been hunted to extinction by those who feared them. 1 record showed David what he needed to know. Buried deep beneath the structure, hidden from all scans and sensors, the Aaron had left a ship. David spent weeks digging through collapsed tunnels and sealed chambers to reach it. The ship was beautiful in a terrible way, all sharp angles and living metal that responded to his touch like it knew him. Its systems came online as he approached, recognizing the changes in his body that he could leave. The ship was fast enough to reach civilized space in days, but David didn't leave. Not yet. That he stood in the ship's control room, looking at star charts that showed the location of every major station and trading hub in the sector. Somewhere out there, the wandering star was flying cargo runs. Captain Renix was counting profits. Goss was following orders. Yali was living with the guilt of what they had done. David wasn't ready to face them. He was still learning what he had become, still testing the limits of his new form, still deciding what kind of creature he wanted to be. Revenge would be easy. He could tear through that ship like paper, kill everyone on board, and disappear back into the void. The old David might have wanted that, but he wasn't the old David anymore. The transformation had given him more than power. It had given him perspective. He could feel the life around him now, and life was precious, rare, worthy of protection. That he didn't want to be a monster. He wanted to be something else. Something that would make the galaxy think twice before calling any human acceptable loss ever again. David trained for another 6 months. He pushed his abilities harder than ever, learning to control electromagnetic fields, to interfere with technology, to project his awareness across vast distances. The void WRMS became his constant companions, their ancient minds brushing against his in something almost like friendship. When a salvage ship finally entered Theta 9's orbit, drawn by the old beacon from the crashed cargo bay, David was readied. He stood on the volcanic plains, looking up at the sky. His eyes burned with golden light. His body hummed with power that shouldn't exist. Behind him, a dozen void WRMS coiled through the air like living nightmares. Time to show the galaxy what humans become when you leave them to die. Rumors spread through Verity. 7 station like fire through dry grass. Something had destroyed a salvage ship near Theta 9. No survivors. No distress signal. The wreckage had been found drifting in orbit, torn apart from the inside. Yusuf heard the stories in every bar and trading post. As one of the few humans in this sector, he paid attention when strange things happened near Deathworlds. His people had a reputation for surviving what shouldn't be survivable. Then the ship arrived at IT docked at Bay 17 without requesting permission. Station security scrambled to respond, but their sensors couldn't make sense of what they were seeing. The vessel was ancient, covered in organic patterns that seemed to move. Its hull was made of something that registered as both metal and flesh. A man walked off the ship alone. Yusuf was in the observation gallery when it happened. He watched the figure move through the docking bay, and something cold settled in his stomach. The man looked human, moved human, but there was something wrong about him. Something that made the aliens nearby step back without knowing why. Security Chief Dana intercepted him at the checkpoint. She was tall, armored, and afraid of nothing. But Yusuf saw her hand shake as she checked the stranger's credentials. David Holt, she read from her scanner. Human, listed as deceased 14 months ago. Cargo bay incident near Theta 9. The reports were exaggerated, David said. His voice was calm, pleasant even. Normal. That made it worse. You were declared dead. And yet here I am. Dana let him pass. Later, she would tell Yusuf that his eyes had caught the light wrong. That when she looked at his biometric readings, half the results came back as unknown species. That something in her ancient instincts, buried deep in her Minari DNA, had screamed at her to run. Yusuf found David in a quiet bar on the station's lower levels. The human was drinking something dark, watching the crowd with eyes that seemed to see too much. You're the human from Theta 9, Yusuf said, sliding into the seat across from him. The one who came back. David looked at him. Up close, Yusuf could see it clearly. Those eyes were wrong. They had a faint golden glow, barely visible, like embers dying in darkness. Word travels fast. Humans stick together out here. We have to. Yusuf leaned forward. What happened to you down there? David was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was distant, like he was remembering a dream. I learned what humans can become when everything else is taken away. He asked Yusuf about the wandering star. Quietly, patiently. Where was it registered? What routes did it run? Who still served on board? Yusuf told him everything. He wasn't sure why. Something about David made honesty feel necessary, like lying would be noticed and remembered. Thank you, David said when Yusuf finished. He stood, leaving payment on the table. You've been kind to me. I'll remember that. What are you going to do? David paused at the door, balanced the equation. He left the bar. Behind him, the lights flickered. Every animal in the station's biodome turned to face the direction of Bay 17. A child in the corridor started crying for no reason. Yusuf stayed in his seat for a long time after David was gone. Administrator Pell received the security report an hour later. The Grothian read it 3 times, his slug-like body trembling with each pass. Biometric anomalies. Unexplained technological interference. Psychological effects on nearby civilians. That he flagged the report and sent it up the chain. Someone more powerful than him could deal with this. That on the other side of the station, Security Chief Dana ran David's scan results through every database she could access. Human baseline, but with cellular structures that didn't match any known species. Organ configurations that shouldn't be possible. Brain activity off the charts. "What the hell happened to you?" she whispered at her screen. The screen flickered. For just a moment, David's face appeared, looking directly at her. Then it was gone, and Dana was alone with her feared T-Bay 17, the ancient ship, undocked. It moved without engine signatures, without navigation beacons, without anything that should have made movement possible. Station sensors tracked it until it reached the edge of their range. It was heading toward the trade routes, toward the shipping lanes where cargo haulers ran their daily circuits, toward the wandering star. Yusuf watched it go from the observation gallery. He thought about the stories he'd heard growing up on Earth, about humans who went into the wilderness and came back changed, about monsters that wore human faces. He thought about the look in David's eyes when he'd asked about his former crew. "God help them," Yusuf said to the empty gallery. "Whatever they did to him, God help them all." Captain Renix had slept well for 14 months. The human's death had been necessary. Business logic. Acceptable loss. He had filed the paperwork, collected the insurance, and moved on to better contracts. Tonight, his sleep ended. The first warning came when the navigation system went dark. Then communications. Then life support readouts, weapons, shields, everything that kept the wandering star alive in the void of space. Renix scrambled to the bridge, his insectoid legs clicking on the metal floor. First Officer Yali was already there, her fur raised, her eyes wide with terror she couldn't explain. "What's happening?" Renix demanded. "Something's out there. Something big. Our sensors can't identify it." Goss stood in the corner, silent as always. But even the massive brute Hari looked unsettled, his yellow eyes fixed on the viewport. Outside, the stars disappeared one by one as something moved between them and the ship. Then the speakers crackled. Every speaker on every deck, all at once. "Captain Renix." The voice was human, calm, almost pleasant. "1 year ago, you made a calculated decision. Let me show you my calculations." The ship shuddered. Through the viewport, they could finally see what was hunting them. An ancient vessel, covered in living metal and organic growths. It was beautiful and horrible, like looking at a predator's face. "All hands, battle stations." Renix shouted. Nothing happened. The weapons didn't respond. The shields didn't raise. The engines remained dead. "You're not in control anymore," David's voice said. "I am." The boarding came through the main airlock. Renix ordered his crew to fight. They tried. Plasma rifles, kinetic weapons, blades. Nothing worked. The weapons simply refused to fire, refused to cut, refused to do anything except sit heavy in trembling hands. David walked through the ship like a ghost. Crew members who tried to stop him found themselves paralyzed, frozen in place by something they couldn't see or understand. He didn't hurt them. He just walked past, his glowing eyes fixed on his destination. The bridge doors opened on their own. Renix saw him and understood, finally, what kind of mistake he had made. David Holt looked human. The same face, the same build, the same quiet demeanor. But his eyes burned with golden fire, and the air around him seemed to bend and twist. "Hello, Captain," David said. "It's been a while." Renix tried to speak, tried to explain, justify, bargain. His mandibles clicked uselessly. Yali stepped forward. Her voice broke as she spoke. David, I tried to stop him. I screamed at him not to do it. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." David looked at her for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft. "I know. I heard you through the airlock. I heard every word you said while I was falling. That's why you get to choose." "Choose what? What happens next?" He turned to Renix. The captain tried to back away, but his legs wouldn't move. "You left me to die because I was acceptable loss," David said. "You were wrong. About me. About humans. About everything." Renix found his voice. "What are you going to do? Kill me? Is that what you came back for?" David smiled. It was a terrible thing to see. "No. Death would be too easy. Too quick. You wouldn't learn anything from it." He walked to the captain and placed one hand on his shoulder. Renix screamed as something passed between them, something that felt like fire and ice and the weight of 1,000,000 miles of void. "I'm going to give you exactly what you gave me." David marched Renix to an escape pod. The captain fought every step, but his body moved anyway, controlled by something beyond muscle and nerve. The pod's coordinates were already programmed. Theta 9. No, Renix whispered. Please. You can't. You're right. It's not fair. David's voice held no anger, no satisfaction, just cold certainty. But neither was leaving me to die. Goodbye, Captain. Maybe you'll survive. Humans have. The pod launched. Through the window, Renix's screaming face grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared into the dark. David turned back to the bridge. Yali stood frozen, tears streaming down her fox-like face. Goss hadn't moved from his corner. The ship is yours, David said to Yali. Take whoever wants to leave. Start over. Where are you going? David looked at Goss. The Brutari met his gaze for the first time, and something passed between them. Fear. Understanding. Humanity has been acceptable loss to this galaxy for too long, David said. I'm going to change the equation. He walked off the bridge. Behind him, the wandering star systems came back online one by one. Yali sank into the captain's chair, shaking. What do we do now? Goss asked. His first words in months. Yali looked out at the stars, at the ancient ship that was already pulling away, at the escape pod trajectory marked on her screen. We become better, she said. We have to become better. 1 year later, the galaxy had a new rule, an unwritten law that every species learned to follow, passed down in whispers and warnings across 1,000 worlds. Don't abandon humans. Don't betray them. Don't leave them to die. They come back different. The story spread faster than light. A Varashi slave ship ejected its human captives into space to avoid inspection. 3 days later, the vessel was found drifting, its crew catatonic with terror, and the humans were nowhere to be found. A mining company stranded human workers on an unstable asteroid to avoid paying them. The humans survived the collapse. The company's board members started disappearing from locked rooms. No one knew how much was David. No one knew how much was other humans who had heard his story and decided to stop being victims. That was the point. Captain Yali ran the Wandering Star now. She had changed its name, changed its purpose, changed everything. Her ship searched for humans in trouble, aliens who needed help, anyone who had been left behind. It wasn't enough to balance the scales. But it was a start. Goss stayed with her. He still didn't talk much. But sometimes, when they rescued someone from a bad situation, he almost smiled. The Galactic Council debated what to do about the changed one for months. Some wanted him destroyed. Some wanted him studied. Some wanted to pretend he didn't exist. They sent an envoy to find him. A brave diplomat who traveled to the edges of known space, following rumors and sightings. She found David on a barren moon, surrounded by void WRMS that had followed him from Theta 9. They circled overhead like living storms, their ancient eyes watching her ship descend. David looked human again. Almost. The glow in his eyes was faint, barely visible unless you knew to look for it. He wore simple clothes, spoke in a quiet voice, and offered her water and food like any gracious host. The council wants to know your intentions, the diplomat said, her voice steady despite her fear. David sat across from her on a flat stone, watching the WRMS dance through the clouds. Tell them this, he said. I don't want conquest. I don't want revenge. Not anymore. I want something simpler. I want the galaxy to understand that humans are not acceptable losses. We're not soft. We're not weak. We're adaptable. We survive. And when you break us, we become something you can't predict. Is that a threat? It's a fact. David smiled. And for a moment, he looked like any other human, just a man who had been through hard times and come out the other side. Work with us, and we'll be the best allies you've ever had. Betray us and learn what we become. The choice is yours. The diplomat returned to the council with his message. They argued for weeks about what it meant. Meanwhile, David continued his work. He appeared on worlds where humans needed help and disappeared before anyone could track him. He spoke with species that had never contacted outsiders, sharing knowledge, building bridges. The void WRMS of Theta 9 began patrolling shipping lanes, protecting vessels that carried human passengers. Fear became respect. Respect became something almost like awe. On a planet at the edge of explored space, David found a child. She was Fenari, like Yali, orphaned when her colony was raided by pirates. She huddled in the ruins of her home, too afraid to cry, too tired to run. David knelt down beside her. His terrifying eyes softened, becoming warm, almost human. "Hey there," he said gently. "I know you're scared. I know everything feels broken right now." The child looked at him with wide, wet eyes. "I was left behind once too," David continued, "on a moon where nothing should survive. But I learned something there. I learned that the universe is cruel sometimes. It breaks you down and leaves you in the dark. But it's not about what the universe does to you. It's about what you become after." He offered her his hand. "Come with me. I'll show you how to survive, how to be strong, how to protect the people who can't protect themselves." The child hesitated. Then, slowly, she reached out and took his hand. David lifted her onto his shoulders and walked into the wilderness. Above them, a void WIRM descended from the clouds, its massive form casting shadows across the landscape. The child should have been terrified. Instead, she laughed as the creature rumbled a greeting. The galaxy had learned to fear what humans become. Now it was time to show them what humans protect. David Holt had been left to die on a death moon. He had come back different, changed, something more than human and something less. But at his core, beneath the power and the terror and the legend, he was still the same, still stubborn, still surviving, still refusing to quit. And now, with the galaxy watching, he was building something new. Not an empire, not an army, a family, made of everyone who had ever been left behind. The different human and his growing band of survivors, showing the universe what happens when you give the broken a reason to keep going. This was only the beginning.